I'm the CEO of Top Line Global Networks. It's a management consulting firm. We advise different clientele from leaders, CEOs, high net worth individuals to Fortune 500 companies. I come from a West African upbringing. My family's from Liberia. So in my childhood, it was a little bit different than other people growing up in Liberia. I was born in Houston, Texas, and at the age of 16 months, I moved to Liberia. My mother put me on a plane with a family lawyer from my father's side of the family, from a historically diplomatic family in Liberia. And so when I got there as a child, growing up, I was able to see a different perspective. And so what I want to do is sort of share that perspective and get into some of the granular details around the difference between abundance and scarcity, not just in business, but in your personal life and just how we see the world around us. So if you could, I'm not going to do a traditional presentation. I'm going to do something a little bit more spiritual and reflective of that jungle upbringing that I was so benefiting of. So if you close your eyes and you begin to envision yourself, your childlike self, in your formative age of 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and you're standing next to me and my childlike self, and I'm gonna journey with you in the jungle of West Africa. And I'm gonna sort of hold your hand and help guide you. When you look down at your feet, you're gonna see your childlike feet before they became older. And under your feet, you will see orange clay like mud. And this is the road that leads deeper into the jungle. And this was one of the first things that I saw when I went out into the jungle at the age of 6. And I looked around and I saw a lot of trees, tall trees, and it was dusk and the sun was setting. There was no electricity. So if you're coming from the city, in the capital city of Monrovia, and you're looking out into this vast jungle, you're very trepid and scared, fearful. You don't know what's out there. But when I looked up from the pickup truck that I hopped off, and I look around, I saw a lot of indigenous people coming out of the jungle and running up to the truck, let's say about 3 dozen of them. And these people are smiling ear to ear, as happy as can be, joyous in their spirit and vibration. And in my very impressionable mind, I felt like I was one of them. I felt like I was part of their family. That's how they made me feel. Very welcoming, very endearing. And this is at the age of 6. For the next year, I became normalized to this environment. The people that lived on this land in the jungle, they didn't have running water. They didn't have plumbing, but they had so much joy. They had so much happiness and contentment. And the reason why is because there was a nurturing, there was some fulfillment in knowing and understanding that everything around you and everyone around you was for you. You know, even if they had to discipline you, they did it out of care and out of love. A lot of times now, in our scarcity environment, in our society, we have people who are mired with anxiety, depression, unease. And one of the reasons that I've observed is because they're not connected to the whole. You know, there's like a suffering that we have when we're not connected to things naturally. And when you see these indigenous people functioning, even though they don't have many of the things that we have, they have so much because they're integrated and connected to nature around them. They're not looking at nature as something that they can sort of benefit from or exploit. They're looking at it as though they're a part of it. And so they have to honor it. And in turn, it honors them. Again, as a millennial, and I look around at the older generations, the way that I was being raised in that jungle before I was impressed with these people was I was being groomed to help manage the land and help procure some of the goods that come from the land and produce. So there's tangerines, there's peppers, there's rubber trees, there's plantains, there's sugarcane. And the indigenous people on the land, they're working on the land, they're earning rice, they're feeding their families. You know, every month there's a celebration where everybody comes together, they share food. So for me, when I see the chasm between where I was in my formative age and where these people were, I gravitated to these people naturally. And I turned my back on sort of coming up in a way where I had an advantage. So my outlook and disposition always was that I never need to have any kind of advantage. I always need to integrate and assimilate where everybody else is. And so growing up, I said to myself, when I grow up, all these workers that are on this farmland, I want to empower them to own the land, cultivate the land, for them and their families to have that level of ownership. So today, with my company, Topline, you know, I have a privileged position to really help deploy solutions in the world. We interface with leadership. They could be presidents, they could be CEOs of companies. We can bring, you know, disruptive solutions to bear in different countries in a very collaborative way, looking at macro solutions to offset the challenges and the problems that they have. A lot of times when I meet the everyday person and I speak to this grand macro vision, you know, they're not able to quantify it. And I have to speak to the difference between an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset. So when we look at the foundation of our society, it's based on scarcity. You can see that in how people treat each other. So again, when I look at the upbringing in Liberia, if I went to school and I acted up, I couldn't just get away with that. I would be accountable for my actions, even if my parents were at work. When I come home, my neighbors would know that I acted up at school and they would discipline me. If somebody robbed something from my house, I wouldn't even be around. The neighbors would tell me and they would catch that robber, right? And that's how everybody's sort of connected. And I noticed that in the Western world, we're not as connected. If somebody leaves their house in the morning and your neighbor wants to stop you and ask you how you're doing, you're going to be irritated by that because you're so busy and so preoccupied with your daily schedule. That's a scarcity mindset. And it shows in the quality of the relationships that we have. So again, from a business standpoint, if I meet somebody in business and I see that they have solutions that can benefit the world, they might be looking at it from a local standpoint. They might be looking at it for what it can do just in their community, locally, what it can do maybe in their state. I'm going to challenge them for what it can do for the country, what it can do for different markets outside of the country, and how you can organize yourself for that level. Because if you're able to work at that level, you're going to develop yourself beyond the capacity for what's needed locally. And you can collect and relate to people when you develop yourself more. So my whole disposition in business is always to look at, you know, what somebody is brilliant at, what they've innovated, what they've, you know, developed creatively, intellectually, and then how can we help scale and grow that? And how can we bring people into places that they wouldn't ordinarily be and help them have success there? And even if it has nothing to do with business and it's just interpersonal development, how do you communicate with people in such a way that it grows everything that you're doing and everything that you have around you? So that's a quick sort of short summary of myself, my business, and my outlook on the world as it relates to scarcity versus abundance. And again, I want to stop right here for anybody that has any questions in the interim.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, you can just use the reaction to raise your hand and I can unmute you briefly to ask your question.
Nobody? Okay. So.
Oh, I believe Chase has a question. Let's see. I'll ask him to unmute.
Marbue, what's been one of the most challenging things dealing with people talking about having an abundance mindset and their programming in business and to capitalize and people's programming to say transact a deal versus connect, for a bigger purpose?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the biggest challenge is everybody's day-to-day stresses. A lot of times when you're talking grandiosity and macro solutions and macro problems, it's hard, again, for people to quantify all that. And, they have to pay their bills. They have different stresses in their day-to-day where they need you to bring it down to a more granular level for them to digest. And so a lot of times if you focus on the short-term transactional, you never get to see the forest through the trees. And I try to balance that with people. I call it planting seeds. So if you are willing and able to plant the seeds for the long-term gain and benefit, it makes the short term a lot easier for you to manage and deal with. But if you always just focus on the short term, then you never get to the bigger, and it's a lot harder. And so, I spend a lot of my time in relationships with people, showing them sort of where they're getting hung up and trying to open up so much more that they can appreciate. So give you an example, my first major client was a billionaire that I cold called. And that was a deliberate strategy, because in my early 20s, when I was living out of my car at 23, it was because I started in a traditional way, working my way up. And from that vantage point, working up, I understood that you may never get up. So try to find a disruptive way to start at the top and learn so many lessons from up there. And then you can work your way up, having all those lessons learned from the top. So that's one example of how you take the very short-term transactional focused hammer to nail approach that people have and sort of open up a more long-term process-oriented development for their benefit. Does that answer your question, Chase?
Yes, thanks. Thank you.
So does anybody else have any questions?
Andy, I think Andy has a question. There we go.
Hi, I'm Andy. I was wondering if I know that you work with a lot of very high net worth individuals who perhaps lead lifestyles that are very removed from what you initially started the talk saying, from nature or even just the indigenous communities' lifestyles. How do you, I guess, tap into the human in them, or that caring essence of, I know you have a lot of wealth and we don't want to, lose that, but we're going to make an impact. I guess, do they come to you caring about a specific topic, or do you present to them any ideas on what the differences that they can make?
What a brilliant question. Yeah, so I tell my story growing up, I never used to tell my story, not to my friends. Nobody knew my background. Nobody knew I grew up in a diplomatic family in Africa or any of those things until I hit my 30s in business. And I understood that the story to tell really humanizes everything. Because here's a story of somebody who came from privilege and turned their back on that privilege to be reflective in somewhere that creates more impact. And I think when you start talking about impact, even if you're talking to older generations of people, which many of the people that I've dealt with when I was in my late 20s and throughout my 30s were twice my age, you find that there's an older perspective that they've been programmed to, that has benefited them, that they've earned respect for their intellectual capital, and that's become a part of their ego. That's become a part of their, I don't know. For me, I don't do well with that. So what I try to do is just showcase, okay, you're climbing up that hill, and even if you're close to the top, you're not where you need to be fully. And this is why you project all of these other things. There's a more refreshing place to be with eclectic, selective leaders who have money or they don't have money, but that's not what they lead with. They don't lead with their ego. They lead with problem solving and getting around quality people. You find that it's hard to find people who are integral, people who have a lot of honor and selflessness. They might have the intellectual capital, they might be the smartest person in the room, but for whatever reason, they're not able to deeply connect. And I just try to create a pathway where I lean in on the relationship, because there's an abundance of smart people on the planet, but there's not enough people, again, who work from a place of not me, but we. And that's what I just try to showcase a culture of. And that's the most challenging part of business, because we're rewarded from capitalistic means, who has the most, and more people, gravitate towards some of the superficial aspects of business. They don't gravitate towards the substantive, qualitative aspects. So when you can showcase that, it's very refreshing to certain people, because they've sort of lost hope. It's like, it sounds too good to be true. This is something, there's a wool being pulled over my eyes. Some people are jaded, many people are jaded. And so if you can showcase that abundance of love, of patience, of support, of wherewithal, you can find some diamonds in the rough out here. And that's sort of the superpower core team tribe. And then you bring those people to other qualified people that you've run across. And there's a lot of celebratory energies that can happen. And that's sort of my shtick. That's my wheelhouse. I'll find scientists, I'll find some of the nerdiest, technically inclined people. They tend to be more introverted. And then I bring them around other people that they can share the same language with and have refreshing dialogue and exchanges with. And that's why I called my company Top Line Global Networks, because it's a network of people top of the line globally. Again, it's not about your net worth. It's not even about your PhD or your qualifications. It's about your human spirit, the intellectual capital that goes along with your human capital, and how best you can balance that and share in what your brilliance is, because the world desperately needs it. So that's sort of the way that I'm able to offset some of the awkwardness that can come from some people who are programmed differently. To conclude, the millennials that are coming into their adult form are now the influential, impactful leaders. And I challenge them to be a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more focused, and a little bit more selfless in their approach. So that's my that's my rebuttal to your question. I hope it helps.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, we have about 3 minutes left before our session ends. If anyone has any more questions, any follow-up questions, or if Marbue, there's anything you just want to say, maybe inspired.
Was there a question that somebody popped up at the bottom?
I I believe so. Here, I can read it. This is from Becky. She says, "Hi there. I find it interesting that you were not sharing who you were at the time. Maybe embarrassed or privileged, question mark. Totally relate to that. However, there is so much strength and authenticity in finding common ground in any situation. When you always be who you are, you always get the best out of people and situations, even if you are very different. X."
So what was the first part about sharing who you are?
She said, "I find it interesting that you were not sharing who you were at the time. Maybe embarrassed to be privileged."
So yes, that's a great introspective statement. If you've seen the movie Coming to America with Eddie Murphy, when he arrives in America, he's very unassuming. And in 1989 December, on a Friday, I was in my private school in Liberia, and on a Friday, we had a free day. I was 7 years old, and we were watching Coming to America, and shots started ringing out in Liberia, in the capital city of Monrovia. And we all ran to the window to see what was happening. And there was a war breaking out. Within a few weeks, I'm back in America. So my approach to assimilating back into America is not to come into America telling people that I come from all this and all that. It was just to be normal, because that's something I always wanted to be. And through just being a normal person, I can be relatable to others. It means I won't get picked on as much. It means that I won't be alienated. So that was my approach. And that was my way of just trying to have organic, natural, deep relationships. And most of the relationships that I forged in my teenage years, I'm still connected to them today.
Amazing. Awesome. Um, yeah, we just
So
have one left. If there's anything else you want to say before I close, with a few remarks, feel free, Marbue.
yes, on social, my Instagram is Tall Pan African. There was some confusion. This was supposed to be an hour long. Maxim offered for me to do a part 2 tomorrow. If anybody has interest in that, I'll continue the discussion tomorrow. There's a lot to talk about. We're partnered with smart city developers that are topping the planet. We're working with NASA hydrogen solutions that NASA has integrated. We have the top AI solutions on the planet that we're developing that moved the Mars rover off of Mars when it got stuck. There's so many innovative, powerful, creative, amazing things that we're doing in the world. Just looking to collaborate with more people that are like us, that care, that are integral, that are honorable, and they're looking to share and be collaborative in the world to serve the greater good. So continue excellence, everybody. Thank you for the time. And sorry it was so short. Look forward to following up with you in the future. Much love and blessings to you and your families.